Hi, I'm David Myrland. Welcome to Take from Caesar. Thanks for coming back. We're going to jump in the sewer called what is it this week? The anti-tax movement, the patriot movement, the tax honesty movement. Who gives a rat's? Nothing you'll hear me say is intended as legal advice. Anything that sounds like that to you, just consider it something somebody else might do on a planet far, far away where the law matters. It doesn't matter here. I prove it on a daily basis. Believe it. This is going to be a very informal little presentation to signify the very little respect I have for the movement, an object that doesn't move. They're stuck in the mud. You got Pete Hendrickson. You got David Champion. You got these termites that comment on my videos through mischaracterization, and we're going to get to it. And you ought to hear what people are saying. The David Champion Pete Hendrickson cult, also known as the tax honesty movement. Now, we're going to read the comments in full first. Then I'm going to go back and critique the comments for the juristic illiteracy they are. It's a cult, therefore. Not that it's been declared a cult by its members or by anybody else, but the behavior is strictly cultish. They have a hero, and if you contradict the hero, they'll twist what you do so that they could launch a personal attack, otherwise known as Democrat. Pelosi lives by it. Schumer lives by it. They mischaracterize and then launch a barrage of diatribe at you based on the mischaracterization. They're so stupid they don't know they're doing it. But it's a mode of it's a defect in reasoning. You can't reason with them. Facts don't matter. Experts don't exist. They won't debate anybody. When's the last time you saw somebody debate an expert? Yeah, only the right does that. So, the David Champion Pete Hendrickson cult, also known as the tax honesty movement. I posted a video here. David Champion, my impression, something to that effect. And then that was the placard or the banner, and then underneath I wrote David Champion's book, my impression, or my thoughts. Yeah, David Champion's book. He calls it Shattering the Myth. I call it Charmin. A single sheet of Charmin, so you can't even use it for anything. I'll go to the store and buy toilet paper. Thank you very much. Same goes for Cracking the Code from Pete Hendrickson. I wrote a review of his book, Pete Hendrickson's book, Cracking the Code. You'll find it somewhere on takefromcaesar.us. And Tax Court has written a review of Pete Hendrickson's book. So, neither one of these guys know what they're doing. And according to David Champion, it's just him and Pete Hendrickson. That there's nobody else really qualified to mention in the same breath as tax honesty. Well, I got your tax honesty right here, David. Mr. Champion and Mr. Hendrickson. Now, we're going to get to these messages that were posted about my thoughts. I said, David Champion's book, Shattering the Myths, my thoughts. My thoughts about the book, about the author, actually, about the author, because I don't even get to the book. Now listen to these comments here. Bobby Smella 2 weeks ago. Today is February 5th, 2020. This guy's video is a joke. He's talking about my video, and he should have put a period right here. David Champion, and no comma right there. David Champion knows what he was talking about, and I, in fact, did buy his book for under $100, and guess what? I no longer pay income tax, because the income tax does not apply to me. I showed my employer the book, and he read it, and none of that worked for my employer. I think he meant none of that worked for my employer, period. Pay income tax to our corrupt government, period. Me, period. Incomplete sentence, no clue. Myrland, you are a joke, a fool, and a clown. Stephen Kiley, a month ago. You didn't read the book. You haven't addressed a single point from the book. I suppose that's why you disabled viewing your dislike and like ratio on this video. It's really cringy and painful to watch a guy so thoroughly debunk a straw man for just over 36 minutes. Who debunked who? Not once did you cite the book. I can't believe no other comments call you out on this unless you're deleting them. But the audacity of titling this video, David Champion's book, Shattering the Myths, My Thoughts, he left that off. When only 2 minutes in, it's completely apparent you haven't read the material you plan to criticize, is completely laughable. To anyone who reads this, if it isn't deleted, do not waste 37 minutes of your life on this, meaning my video. Mr. Myrland does not offer a critique of David Champion's published work. He does not cite the material even once. The critique he offers is a straw man, either of his own making or something provided to whom from another source. That's not even English. John Jones, take from Caesar. It's pretty simple. You can't withhold from paychecks unless you're a withholding agent. And that entity is defined. You really should read his book. Stephen Kiley, take from Caesar. No, that's not how an argument is made. That's not even, at the very least, how a critique is made. If you didn't read the work you are criticizing, then your words are nothing but baseless accusations and unfounded claims. That which is asserted without evidence will be dismissed without evidence. You are guilty of a very elementary logical fallacy called the straw man. If it were any casual on YouTube, they'd be guilty of being uninformed and disingenuous. But a man of your caliber is being outright malicious. The fact that you are doubling down and defending this behavior is absolutely disgraceful and shreds all credibility from anything you say. Oh, now let's go back to the beginning and get out my cleaver. This guy's video is a joke. David Champion knows what he's talking about, and I, in fact, did buy his book for under $100. And guess what? I no longer pay income tax. You pay when the government tells you. It has nothing to do with the law. But since your teachers have never even been in court on their findings, they can't tell you this. You can't even have a discussion of Section 83 that the government says explains how to tax every penny of compensation paid for services in the country. You can't even have that. And they don't understand these harebrained, also known as non-resident alien, arguments are, first off, they're theoretical. They're constitutional, subject to interpretation by the judge. Whereas the law, and I've read hundreds of cases that say the law is first, the courts have to go by the law, and when the language is clear, the argument's over. That's why I use just the law. You pay when the government tells you you will pay. The government is not a strict cop. The government is a pack of carjackers with pistols in prisons. But your gurus can't tell you this. I've been in the stream of victims for 30 years. And your experts can't tell you this because they have no experience with the system. They have an approach to the tax code that I can proudly wipe myself with. They have no clue. David Champion and Pete Hendrickson have proven nothing. And the fact of the matter is, You, Bobby Smellet, can't even see me. Oh, because the income tax does not apply to me. Even what applies to you, if it protects you, you can't have it. The law doesn't count for squat in court. And so you pay when the government says you have to. Or you go to prison. And they got a game plan to handle David Champion and whatever argument comes out of his work. Same Peter Hendrickson. I showed my employer the book, and he read it, and none of that worked for my employer. Right. Have you heard of Dick Simkinen? Yeah, an employer. Where was he? Arizona? Stopped withholding from his employees. Was sent to prison for it. Got out, on probation, screwed up, went back to prison, died of stress. And I never claim it works for your employer. I never claim you won't have to pay. So where does all this come from? This is your own fantasy, Bobby Smella. I never said anything about not paying the government what the government seeks. I work to abate the advent of criminal charges. I don't work on liens and levies. I don't prevent the government from getting your money. I prevent the government from locking your ass up in prison. And I've done it a bunch of times. And I do it with strictly relevant, applicable law. Myrland, you are a joke, a fool, and a clown. Tell that to the Seventh Circuit. They call my statutory interpretation outlandish theories. And yet, for more than 26 years, they've had the opportunity, and there's even a subsection of 6702 that requires the Secretary to put together a list of frivolous arguments. And for 26 years, they've refused to put my stuff on the argument list. And you don't find out until you get to court, oh, the law is frivolous and we won't talk about it. So I'm not even on the frivolous argument list. After 26 years. And my treatise has shut down criminal investigations and nullified tax grand juries. I work against criminal charges and loss of liberty. I don't work to keep your employer from withholding from your paycheck. I never said that. I've been recommending since 1996. That was in another century. Pay the government what it asks for. Start a home business. Get your kids involved. Teach them entrepreneurialism. And pay the government what it says you owe. Establish or gather all the allowable deductions H&R Block says you can get away with. Because you don't want a relationship with a government that keeps the law secret. Since 1996, I've been recommending that. And so this comment about, oh, it didn't work for my employer, who are you talking about? It has nothing to do with me. And yet you use that mischaracterization to launch to say, oh, you're a joke, a fool, and a clown. I never said your employer shouldn't deduct from your paycheck. Where does that come from? You're the joke, you're the fool, and you're the clown. You don't know jack squat about me. You can't even see me because you're studying. They aren't even researchers. David Champion is a manure spreader. Pete Hendrickson is a loud manure spreader. Next, Stephen Kiley. You didn't read the book. Of course I didn't. You haven't addressed a single point from the book. Listen, my video is about David Champion, and the video of his that I watched where he's on the moon, or Mars, he's on Mars with his conclusions. Why would I spend money on a book written by, hang on. Hey, Bill Clinton wrote a book about marital fidelity. Oh yeah, I gotta go buy that book. Mike Tyson wrote a book about nuclear physics. Oh yeah, I gotta go buy that book. When David Champion is so obviously misguided from the video I watched that he can't render a complete competent conclusion about tax law. He's in Chapter 3 of the Tax Code, non-resident aliens and foreign corporations. That's why I started my video with the brief 1992 memorandum from a district court chief judge on how the non-resident alien argument is wrong. So if you make it, you are declaring, you're proclaiming to the world, you can outright that district court chief judge on the topic. And yet, I don't see anybody's memorandum. They argue 861 by looking briefly at the statute, and then they spend a lifetime in the regulations, instead of looking at the plain language of the statute, which expressly includes in gross income the value of services. Get a clue. You haven't addressed a single point from the book. What I addressed was the lack of credibility everything in the book has, and so I'm not going to spend a penny on it. I'm not even going to review it if somebody pays me to do it. Period. You haven't addressed a single point from the book. It's like discussing Mike Tyson's conclusions about nuclear physics. Why would you do that? I'm not stupid. I suppose that's why you disabled viewing your dislike and like ratio on this video. I've disabled it on most of them, okay? I don't want to hear it. You either want to learn the law or you don't. But to raise your voice, and this is where, okay, I don't want to hear it. I'll take comments, and I've gotten plenty of great comments. I've had to totally change the way I look at law because of you. Just the other day, you are amazingly knowledgeable. Thank you. And yet other people who don't have a clue because they're studying David Champion and Pete Hendrickson. You can't do non-resident alien. Wesley Snipes will tell you that. Yeah, how about that? Wesley Snipes and Larkin Rose and Eddie Kane. These are inmates or former inmates, and the non-resident alien makes them that. Why would you go with David Champion when he says Chapter 3 is for me? It's real cringy and painful to watch because you don't know what you're looking at. I find the cult leaders to be painful and cringeworthy. Not once did you cite the book. I cited the author's lack of credibility. He claims non-resident alien status and goes to Chapter 3 when in fact in 30 years I've never met anybody that the IRS asked to pay a Chapter 3 tax. Never once. Never once. And David Champion's never even been to court. He doesn't cite any arguments that the courts use to discredit his statutory claims, which we'll get to. I can't believe no other comments call you out on this. Well, I was saving them up. Unless you're deleting them, because I wanted to make this tutorial about them. Because you're morons. The audacity of titling this video, and he cuts off the end of the title. David Champion's book, Shattering the Myths. ... My thoughts is what he cut out of this. So you cut off part of the title so you could mischaracterize it. Watch this, everybody. He diced up the title of the video. I just said it was my thoughts about his book. Do you have any thoughts about a book that you haven't bought yet? Yeah. I got thoughts about that book on nuclear physics that Mike Tyson wrote. I got thoughts about that book on marital fidelity that Bill Clinton wrote. So I have thoughts before I buy a book. But they are thoughts about the book. And it comes from, the thoughts are created out of the incompetence David Champion illustrated and highlighted in the video of his that I watched about Chapter 3 and a U.S. person and a withholding agent. So yeah, I have thoughts about a book. I never claimed it was a review of the book. But he can't afford to keep this in the title. That was in the title. My thoughts about the book. That's all. It wasn't a review of the book. Moron. When only 2 minutes in, it's completely apparent you haven't read the material you plan to criticize. I'm not criticizing the material. I'm discrediting it from the incompetence illustrated by David Champion and making a decision before I spend money so that I don't waste the money. And this guy calls that completely laughable. Look at that. It's completely laughable to have an opinion about a book you haven't read. Well, look what the author said over here. If it's Mike Tyson, I'm not buying his book on nuclear physics. If it's David Champion, I'm not buying his book on tax law. I have a thought before I read the book. Meaning, you'll buy a book that you haven't even had a thought about yet. You just walk into a bookstore and pick up any book and buy it. I didn't say it was a review of the book. Stupid. To anyone who reads this, if it isn't deleted, do not waste 37 minutes of your life on Mr. Myrland's video. Mr. Myrland does not offer a critique of David Champion's published work. Mr. Myrland never said he was giving a critique on the published work. He does not cite material even once. That's right, because it can't be worth anything, and so I'm not even going to open it. The critique he offers, it's not a critique. It's a critique of the author to say he's so stupid in that video on his channel, I can't trust a word he says, and he never goes to court. I wrote 3 clients to the Supreme Court in 2018. I wrote their appeals on the 7th, 9th, and 11th circuits. I'm 5 for 6 against the State Attorney General of Oregon under the Unfair Trade Practices Act. Nothing to do with taxes. And this sentence. Listen to this. The critique he offers is a straw man, either of his own making or something provided to whom from another source. What the hell language is that? John Jones. Take from Caesar. It's pretty simple. You can't withhold from paychecks unless you're withholding agent, and that entity is defined. You should really read his book. No, I read the definition of the entity. Okay? The withholding agent is somebody that withholds under Chapter 3 of the tax code. Well, that's for non-resident aliens. And so you didn't really even watch my video. I started with the district court chief judge's memorandum against the argument. People go to prison all the time for the argument. And so why would you say withholding agent? The government's collecting under Chapters 1, 2, 21, and 23. Those impose the taxes that are paid. Those impose what should be taxes only, but those are the chapters the IRS draws upon to say you owe taxes when you sell your services. Period. You didn't hear Chapter 3 in that list, did you? No, you didn't. And I've never heard of Chapter 3 from the IRS as it relates to anybody I've met. And I've been in the stream of victims for it's about 30 years. So, no, it's not simple. It's pretty simple if you know how to read a statute, but it gets real complicated when you're listening to somebody as stupid as David Champion or Pete Hendrickson. So, the definition of withholding agent confines you to Chapter 3. Well, what are you going to do in Chapter 3 when they want Social Security self-employed from you? Chapter 2. Or FICA, Chapter 21. What are you going to do? Withholding agent only applies to taxes imposed by Chapter 3. But David Champion can't read, and he's trapped in the non-resident alien mindset, and so you'll never learn anything like this from him. Stephen Kiley. That's not how an argument is made. Well, according to a municipal judge here in Washington, I don't think it prejudices you one bit, Mr. Myrland. You're obviously no neophyte to the judicial system. Your pleadings are in the top 1 percentile of everything I see in this court. And a state judge here in Washington. Your memorandum is very well written. It's written better than all the attorneys write that come into this court. And I've been writing arguments since 1992. I've read over 4,500 federal decisions. And Stephen Kiley's going to tell me how an argument is made. I leave the government speechless. Let's give you that web address. wevgov.com/Orth. In the Robert Orth case, go to that page. You'll see an exchange of briefs on the 7th Circuit. And I wrote the appellant's pleadings. And you'll see me draw upon perhaps 35 statutes and regulations for the several arguments. And you look at the government's reply and the court's award of the judgment to the government, and nowhere do they even mention the provisions relied upon, like the statutory definition of citizen in the Social Security chapters. Those are controlling statutes, and the government can't even speak about them. So who are you to tell me how an argument is made when I leave the government's finest attorneys speechless on tax briefs since 1994, late 93, my first briefs I wrote in my life, after I wrote my curriculum. I don't know how to make an argument. Excuse me. My argument made them amend a regulation that had stood for 15 years, 26 CFR 1.83-6. I have a video about it on my YouTube channel called Shove This Regulation. If I don't know how to make an argument, how do I force them to change a regulation? And that, by the way, was the only Chapter 1 reference to the W-4 form. It said, bring the Chapter 24 W-4 form in here. And I attacked it on 3 bases, and they struck that regulation and totally revamped it. Totally unrecognizable from the original. If I can't make an argument, how come my argument forced the Treasury, I think it's the Treasury, to amend the U.S. passport application? Because it threatened you with a $500 penalty under Tax Code Section 6039E. And I pointed out to them that only applies to corporate travel. And so now the form threatens you with a $500 penalty under some other title. So, no, I don't know how to make an argument at all. I've only been writing against the government's attorneys since late 1993. 5 times to the Supreme Court by 1998, October. That's not even, at the very least, how a critique is made. It's not a critique. It's a caution. David Champion's video proves him to be so ill-informed regarding tax law and the IRS that I can't afford to buy his book for 1 second. It's just something I'd have to pack up and move the next time I move. Or I could heat my house with it. It's not a critique of the book. It's a critique of David Champion, which discredits his book. And so, now, look at this. Look at this. This is Democrat. So, make a mischaracterization and then launch on a bunch of diatribe based on your conclusion, which is skewed, false. It wasn't a critique of the book. I never claimed it was. So, this is a fiction. How a critique is made. I'm not making a critique. When I make a critique, I'll call it a book review like I did with Pete Hendrickson's. You'll hear me say it. You didn't hear me say this. If you didn't read the work you are criticizing, then your words are nothing but baseless accusations and unfounded claims. It's founded on his incompetence, that his book is worthless. Mike Tyson wrote a book on nuclear physics. Are you going to go buy that book? Only if you intend to laugh at it. Well, it's same. Same with cracking the code. Somebody bought it for me, and I did a review of it. So, baseless accusations. They weren't accusations. It's my assessment based on the incompetence illustrated and demonstrated in David Champion's video. So you've read a whole lot into this. And now we're going to strike you down. That which is asserted without evidence will be dismissed without evidence. Oh, I don't need evidence to have thoughts about a book. And my thoughts were based on his video. If somebody is a boxer, there's a bunch of books that they could write that I'm not going to buy. Like Bill Clinton's book on marital fidelity. Can you hear that? David Champion in his book on tax law. Can you hear that? Pete Hendrickson in his book about the tax code. Can you hear that? Same. They're not qualified. They're nowhere near qualified. They haven't done a tenth of the research I've done into the language of American tax law. And they understand even less. You are guilty of a very elementary logical fallacy called the straw man. No, I didn't offer critique. So there. So a whole bunch of diatribe based on it could be accidental due to a defect in reasoning capacity, or it could be intentional, just so they could smear me on a false basis. Okay? If it were any casual on YouTube, they'd be guilty of being uninformed and disingenuous, but a man of your caliber is being outright malicious. No, I'm not. I have thoughts about that book without even opening it. And the thoughts are, you got to be kidding. Go get Bill Clinton's book on marital fidelity. Go get it, dog. Rap is music. And the rest of the falsehoods out there. And I could do my own tutorial about rap. Webster's Children's Dictionary, 2008, definition of music. Tones, notes, melodies, put together in a pleasing or meaningful way. And then you got Eminem chanting, shove a gerbil up your ass through a tube. No, it's not music. Rap is not music. All the children's lives are filled with the ghetto retarded. America gives its children an adult sewer to live in. And really, I'm guilty of being uninformed and disingenuous. No, I'm not. I have thoughts before I buy that book, and this is what my thoughts are. Because I've seen people go to prison. 2 ladies died. Christine York, 1993, made the non-resident alien arguments on several back tax returns, got levied into poverty, and went from being a self-reliant, single 52-year-old human resources specialist for a corporation to having her credit destroyed, her paycheck taken, had to move back in with her mother, and one day her digestive tract went into paralysis, and she lied on a gurney at the University of Washington Medical Center undiagnosed for 30 days with no digestive movement whatsoever, and then died of a massive stroke. So, I'm not being malicious, I'm being cautious. Stay the hell out of Dave Champion's book and out of Pete Hendrickson's book. Both of them are morons compared to an actual researcher. The fact that you are doubling down and defending this behavior of having thoughts before I read a book, thoughts about it, and I said it was created by the author's incompetence, is absolutely disgraceful and shreds all credibility from anything you say. I hope it does, because I don't want to hear from you again. Right here. It's all based on this mischaracterization. I didn't have a critique of his book. I didn't claim to have. I said outright, I'd never buy it. It can't be valid. The guy's incompetent as a researcher. He's stuck in chapter 3, non-resident alien, go to prison. I have to ignore the guy. I have to caution the public. Tens of millions of Americans have stayed out of prison by following my advice. Which I already told you. Start a home business. File returns. You don't want a relationship with a herd of pistol-bearing carjackers who have prisons But David Champion and Pete Hendrickson can't tell you this because they never go to court. Nowhere near compared to what I've done the last 5 years. 2 lawsuits, South Carolina, 2 in South Dakota, counterclaim in Kentucky, tax court, Texas, 7th, 9th, 11th Circuit appeals. Those 3 appealed to the Supreme Court. I wrote every word of it. Didn't slow down for any of it. Bam. The counterclaim in Kentucky, Taxpayers' Bill of Rights says the taxpayers are entitled to clear explanations of the laws in all IRS proceedings, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so the DOJ, which had sued a man in Kentucky, a lawsuit to convert IRS liens or assessments to real estate. They said, he owns this real estate, we want it. He owes this money. And it was property, it was real estate he lost to his wife several years before that in a divorce. So he had nothing to lose in the lawsuit. And he called me for an idea. He wanted to meet me. He called me, and I said, it's painful to watch somebody just sit back getting sued. You ought to go on the offense. What do you say? So he filed a countersuit in U.S. District Court under his docket number, suing the government for clear explanation of the provisions. Well, first off, 3 different causes of action. Number 1, I want a clear explanation of each and every tax regulation and every tax statute. Second cause of action. Okay, if you don't want to do number 1, number 2, I want a clear explanation promised in the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights of these provisions. And they're on the homepage of takefromcaesar.us. And the third cause of action, if I can't get clear explanations of the law, then it's void for vagueness. The tax has to be imposed by clear and unequivocal language. Where the construction of the tax law is doubtful, the doubt is to be resolved in favor of whom upon which the tax is sought to be laid. If you can't even talk about the law, I win under that standard, and that's a maxim stated many times by the U.S. Supreme Court, that if it's not imposed by clear language, the taxpayer wins. And the court dismissed his lawsuit. You can't have an explanation of the law. So you won't find anybody that's done as much work as I have. If all you looked at was the last 5 years. Like I said, 5 trips to the Supreme Court by 1998, October term. Find somebody. Start looking. Nobody's out there. It was rhetorical. You won't find anybody. And yet, based on a mischaracterization, look at the diatribe this guy launches upon. He just goes for it. You are I never said it was a critique of the book. It was my thoughts about the book, not a review of the book. But I know enough about the book that I'm not going to spend a penny on it. Based on the fact the author's mind is locked in non-resident alien status. He teaches withholding agent. It's relevant only to Chapter 3 of the Tax Code, the 1440s. Why would I spend a penny on that book? It's terrible before I open it. Know I'm saying? Sup da yo. No, you're the rappers of jurisprudence and civic duty. You're just a bunch of rappers. These David Champion cult crows, magpies, standing around squawking at things they don't understand. Fact of the matter is, you can't see me. Stephen Kiley and the David Champion cult, the tax honesty movement, a misnomer. There's nothing honest about it. How does Section 83 operate in your conclusion that U.S. citizens do owe the tax? They won't even look at Section 83, and this is the reason. They can't understand one paragraph of tax law that explains whether or not, it determines whether or not you have a relationship with the IRS. It explains how to tax all compensation for services paid in the entire country. They can't understand it, and so they throw stones at it. The first time I saw it, it slapped me in the face, and I said, if this applies to me, it's not being enforced. I immediately went to the University of Washington Law Library and looked up 70 or 80 cases under Section 83, and I found a bunch that says it explains how to tax all compensation. How about that? Revenue Ruling 2007-19, Section 83A provides for the determination of what is to be included in gross income when a contractor or employee sell their services. And because they can't interpret it, they can't understand it, they throw stones at it. And that's who you're getting your pointers from. Stephen Kiley, John Jones, Bobby Smella. These are the only negative comments I've gotten on that video. And that's like 2 months. So no, I'm not getting a slew of bad comments. There were a couple of others, but this particular mischaracterization stands out in them. I paid no attention to the others. These just came in, like a month ago and later, and this argument that it was supposed to be a critique of that book, a book review, is what he meant to say, is false. I told everybody, I'm not going to buy the book. First place I went, it was Amazon, $160. No, I'm not buying that book. I don't care what price it is. I'd rather buy toilet paper, real toilet paper, not just one little square piece of coarse toilet paper. Go use one square of toilet paper. You'll know what I mean. It's useless. So their books aren't even rolls of toilet paper. And yet this diatribe based on the false accusation that I was offering a book review. No, I wasn't. I'm telling you, because I've seen so many people go to prison. Because I've seen what the government is willing to do to you to get you in prison. A bunch of times. Because of that, it's a caution. Their books aren't worth squat. They don't know what they're talking about. The government says you're a citizen of the United States. The government says we got to comply with the tax code. The government says, and this is the courts now, statutory definitions. If you don't meet the definition, then you aren't subject to that law. And the government says Section 83A explains how to tax all compensation. I take those as maxims and I begin my research. David Champion begins with, I don't think I'm a U.S. citizen. And it guided his entire boat down the wrong river. And then you came across him on the wrong river and he sold you some snake oil from the bow of the steamboat. Yeah, snake oil. Take this, it'll cure what ails you. And he's wrong. It was just a bunch of sick, rancid, I don't know. Laxative. That's what it is. It's a laxative. It makes what comes out of you real runny and nasty. And we're looking right at it, folks. This was runny and nasty. It's all based on a presumption, a false accusation that I was offering a book review. I was offering a caution. Please don't go to prison. The best way to do that is to stay away from David Champion and Pete Hendrickson. Isn't that right, Mr. Snipes? So, please, you gotta spare me. This is why I turn off the comments on most of my videos. I'll leave some on, and I've gotten some great comments from people, but the jack shit in the comments is a deterrent. I don't want to hear it. And yet, every moron out there has an opinion, even if they have to mischaracterize what I say to launch on that opinion. Well, I don't care either. And you're in a cult. That's cultish conduct. And so the tax honesty movement is a cult. It's built on toilet paper, 2 squares of it. Wow, yay. I got, you know, those plastic tubs with a folding blue top that interlocks that you store files in? I got bucket after bucket after bucket of case law, meaning documents I wrote for cases, client files, litigation. And these two haven't even been to court on their findings. You know, when I push the hell out of my findings, and the result is people don't get indicted. Model Criminal Jury Instruction 9.42 on the Ninth Circuit. A person is not willful if they have a good faith misunderstanding of the law, even if unreasonable. I have an understanding of the law the government can't even refute, and it has shut down IRS criminal investigations, plural, and it has nullified grand juries, plural. Chris Chapman, there's a video early on in my tutorials, several videos I started my page with. One is called Tax Grand Jury No Indictment. Listen to that interview with Chris Chapman. He went before the grand jury, used my approach, and the DOJ filed a motion for a finding of contempt against him with the court. Hey, he won't give us handwriting exemplars. He won't give us voice exemplars, voice samples. And he went to court on it and said, I'll give them all the exemplars they want. They can't prove they have any authority over me. In fact, I filed this criminal complaint, Your Honor. You got a copy. And he says it looked like you threw cold water on her. She had already said, well, because in June, and she's looking down at her paperwork, talking about a trial. The court had already scheduled his trial. The grand jury hadn't even indicted him yet. And he went before the grand jury, and they did not indict him. That was January of 2007. Hasn't heard anything about a criminal investigation or anything criminal since. He was the first one to benefit in that way from my congressional filing. New Year's of 2006, 80 members of Congress got 180 pages from me. In that 180 pages was a 58-page memorandum, 33-page criminal complaint for racketeering and other charges, a 12-page notarized cover letter with exhibits of its own, a 7 or 8-page certificate of service, a 6-page abstract of primary claims, and a 7 or 8-page table of authorities and exhibits. 80 members of Congress. Cost me almost $6,000 for all the mailing, printing, notarization. And Chris filed an affidavit of joinder saying, I hereby join that complaint. I'm a similarly situated witness to crime. And then later, they called him before the grand jury. They came right to his door and said, this is a subpoena. You have to appear before the grand jury. And he says, all right, because I'd already been coaching him. And he goes, I get to go before the grand jury. And he reaches over and grabs the IRS agent's hand and shakes it and shakes the other guy's hand. He goes, all right. And he said the look on their face was like, total bewilderment. And he did. He told the grand jury, they don't deny a single thing in this criminal complaint. They can't prove they have any authority. They're the ones that ought to be in prison. And the grand jury did not indict him. So, and it's happened several times since, okay? It's got to be upwards of 15, maybe a little more, of people with criminal investigations, or the IRS stated an intent to open a criminal investigation, or somebody was actually before an actual grand jury at the time they met me, and 12 to 15 times the criminal side of the government's operation shut down. Because they can't even prove you owe a tax based on applicable governing provisions. If all you've done is sell your services, Section 83. If it's Chapter 1, gross income in the form of capital gains or alimony, whatever, it's going to be taxed under Tax Code Section 1. Well, Tax Code Section 1 doesn't mention U.S. citizen. So they wrote a regulation under Section 1 that says citizens of the United States owe this tax. Well, that's a regulation that deviates from statute. And we challenged that on the 7th Circuit, and you see the exchange of briefs on the wevgov.com Robert Orth page. They didn't even mention the argument, and they still won the case. On the 7th Circuit, in the Vallone decision, 2012, the 7th Circuit says, you're not a non-resident alien, you're a U.S. citizen, and you owe the tax. See Section 1 and 26 CFR 1.1-1, the IRS regulation that identifies the subject of the tax. So the 7th Circuit said the regulation identifies the subject. You can't do that with a regulation. It has to be a statute. The 16th Amendment says Congress can only collect the tax, not the Treasury when it writes a regulation. So the 7th Circuit says the regulation identifies the subject, but when you tell the 7th Circuit only the regulation identifies the subject, you get penalized thousands of dollars, and they won't talk about it. Okay? That's the finest work you will ever see done in relation to challenging the authority of the IRS. That particular argument. And it's been right in front of everybody forever. And instead they make the argument, I'm a non-resident alien. Rap is music. While they're chimp stepping and humping the doorknob as on their best day. I have shunned the movement since 1992. And this is why. They keep people stupid. The movement is for stupidity. You can't even see me. And your magpies on my YouTube channel, give me a break. Hold on to it for somebody else. You can't even see me. These two are not researchers. They're manure spreaders. One of them doesn't have a muffler. That's the only difference between the two. And the movement is a cult. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. None of this is legal advice, except that part where I said, file tax returns, pay what they say you owe, start a home business, gather all the allowable deductions you can get away with, and live your life without government. Because it's not a strict cop. It's a horde of carjackers with pistols in prisons. That advice has kept literally tens of millions of Americans out of prison. And you're welcome. I'm David Myrland. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching. Take from Caesar.